Hello, everybody. My name is Donna Wilson. I'm an executive publisher for economics based in Amsterdam. I think I'm just repeating what Gamze has just said, but my Turkish isn't so good, so maybe we'll be repeating one another some more today. Thank you for having me. This is quite a long presentation. There are 55 slides, and unfortunately, I haven't memorized them all off the top of my head. So I will be referring to my screen, and not to this one, because this one's going to be in Turkish. So bear with me, and hopefully there's some interesting information in here. Maybe a lot of it you know already, and I'm just repeating what you already know. I believe that these slides will be made available to you afterwards, so if you think you've missed something, then you could always refer back to the presentation later. There's a lot of useful tips in here and suggestions. And what we're hoping to do is to leave you with some information, more informed on how to publish and make your chances better at getting published in the more reputable and recognized international journals. So why do you need to publish? I probably don't need to tell you this, but it's one of the necessary evils of deciding to be in research. It's a requirement, and as such, I think it's good that you know the best ways to get published. What are you looking to publish? Well, it's important that your article, your information is new. You're not repeating what somebody else has done. That's just redundant information. It's been there. People have read it before. And you would just be claiming credit for something that is not yours. These are generally the original research articles that I'm referring to, but we also publish reviews of subjects. These are generally referred to for overviews of a subject area, educational purposes, and we publish these in both journal format and in book format. And generally what we're looking for are manuscripts that advance the knowledge of the field. They take it that step further and help those in the field and beyond your own field of interest understand what you're doing and the progress that you're making. And what shouldn't you be publishing? Well, anything that has no scientific interest. Nobody's interested in reading that. There's enough information out there, so don't dilute. Don't publish something that you worked on years ago, have put in a drawer and forgotten about, and decide, well, you know, may as well get some credit for this after all. If it's out of date, then your chances are nobody's going to be interested in having it published in their journal. And don't duplicate. Like I said, if it's been done before, then you're only diluting the field. And if you submit to a journal something that has been published before, then your chances of getting published there are next to nothing. So you need a really strong manuscript to present your contributions. And what is a strong manuscript? Well, it should be new, it should be very clear, useful to the community, useful to the researchers, your peers, and you should be telling something exciting, something that people want to hear, otherwise they're not going to read it. You can publish as much as you want, but at the end of the day, what you want is that people are actually reading and citing your work, right? A strong manuscript is presented in a clear and structured fashion. You're following the general rules that have been set down for scientific articles. There might be slight nuances in how that has to be structured depending on the type of article that you're going to publish. But generally, they tend to follow the same format. And if you follow the Guide for Authors, pretty much you'll get a good idea of what needs to be presented. It's important that the people that are going to review your manuscript, the reviewers, the editors on the journal, can grasp really, really quickly what you're trying to convey to them, what the message is, and the significance. And just remember that when you decide to submit your manuscript to a journal and to the editors and the reviewers in that community, you're making demands on their time. And these are people who, for many different reasons, have decided to become an editor, to become a reviewer. But one of the reasons for them doing it is not for wasting their time. So if you send them a manuscript that isn't a strong manuscript, you're wasting their time. And the chances are that you're not going to get past the initial submission point. So you really need to think carefully about what you're submitting before you actually go ahead and submit. Your article, once it's published, can be your passport to your immediate community and beyond. Basically, it's your name, it's on that paper, it's on those results. You're claiming that intellectual property. It's yours. You did it. It's your work. That is going to lead to recognition within your subject area and hopefully beyond into other areas. So make it something that you want to leave as a legacy for yourself, not something that you'll look back on later and be ashamed of. How many of you have told your students, or how many of you are students whose first search begins with Google? I bet there's quite a few. Many of you forget that you have a library and a librarian at your disposal, people who are very well trained in how to search and what to search. And if you're starting to think about the publication process and the journals in which you want to publish, these are the people, the experts and the resources that should be the first place that you're going to. Google is fine for getting, fast information, but you need to always ask yourself, how reliable is that information? The people who've invested in your library resources have invested in reliable information. They know that it's been vetted. They know that there are reviewers and editors who've also been vetted, who have said that the information in that journal is qualified to be published and to be put out there. What you might find on Google, maybe not. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you're referencing, Google content might be there now, might be there today, might be there tomorrow, but is it going to be there next week? Is it going to be there in 6 months' time? Is it going to be there in 20 years' time? There's a lot of investment that goes into making sure that the resources that you're going to are reliable resources that can be still accessed 20 years from now and beyond. So learn about the resources that your institute has. Familiarize yourself with the librarian and make use of their resource. Very valuable resource. I can't say very much about what you have here. I do know that I'm very pleased to see Science Direct up there from Elsevier and Scopus. Very pleased. But looking at this, you have a wealth of information at your fingertips, and this is what you should be using and less of Google. So back to the types of papers. There are different types of scientific communication and different types of journals that accommodate them. The most typical format is the full original research paper. We then have, for the more rapid communications, the letters, the short communications, a lot shorter in size. The immediacy of those papers is greater than those of the original research. Maybe it's not the full results, but you want to get the message out and you want to claim ownership and claim credit earlier on in the process. Some of these types of papers are more common in some fields than others. We tend to see more letters journals, perhaps in the life sciences, in the physical sciences, and less so in the social sciences. And we also have the review papers. Some of these are within dedicated review journals. Some of them also publish in the research journals, maybe 1 or 2 a year. But usually the difference here is that the reviews, regardless of whether they're in the research journal or the dedicated review journal or they're in a book, they'll be invited. So it's not a case of choosing to submit a review. Usually you're invited to do that. So before you're thinking about what type of manuscript you want to write, what kind of article, you really need to look at the work that you have to present. Have you got enough results there to accommodate it in a full article? Remembering that some of these articles can be up to 40, 50 pages long, depending again on the field that you're coming from. Or are your results so thrilling that you really need to get them out there as soon as possible into a letters journal or a short communication? Even then, we have other means where the communication immediacy is prevalent, such as the archives, preprint repositories. So again, it really has to do with the type of information and how immediate your results have to be. So before you make the choice, think, talk to some people, talk to your peers, talk to your supervisors, ask them for their advice, tell them what you're thinking, tell them what it's based on, and solicit their advice. And more often than not, you know, having solicited their advice, you'll have a better idea about the type of paper and the type of journal that you should be submitting to. So next we're going to look at the general outline of original research paper. Let's focus on that for the time being. We'll just look at the general structure, the process of writing, how you're going to build that article up, your authorship. It might not just be you who's writing the paper, so how do you acknowledge others who are contributing? How to build your title, your abstract, introduction, methods, results, discussion, references. And last but not least, when you're doing all of this, keeping in the back of your mind ethics, what not to do. The order that I just is actually the reverse of how you should be thinking about building your article. You should really be thinking about from the bottom up. The last thing that you should be doing is starting with your title and then building your article from there. I think you'll find that when you're working from the bottom up, analysing your results and building your paper, by the time you get to putting the title there, you'll probably have gone through about 10, 15 iterations of what it could be. But generally, in terms of the structure, you need to think about it in terms of head, body and tail. With the head being the metadata, the title, the authors, the affiliation, the keywords, the kind of thing that people are going to search on and pull results back on. And then you have your main text, so the body of your article, keeping in mind that the journal that you're submitting to could have quite strict word limitations, page limitations. So again, you need to be thinking about the kind of restrictions that have been imposed by the editors in the aims and scope, in the guide for authors, and look at that before you start so that you have a good idea about how much you should contribute to each of those sections. Try to make your article as concise as possible. No one wants to hear a waffle. If you can say something with an image or with one word instead of 5, then that's what you should be aiming to do. Again, thinking in terms of the people that you're submitting this to, their time, and how quickly they're going to grasp the message that you're trying to give them in your paper. And then you'll be finishing off the tail with your conclusions, your acknowledgements and the references, and any supplementary data that you want to provide. So you're building from the bottom up. It's a wall. Think about it in terms of that. You have your data, your figures, your tables that you've taken from your research. That is the core of your paper. Those are your results. The results are what's going to make your paper different. What you build around that is just your clarification, your methodology. As far as authorship is concerned, policies might differ from one journal to the next, again, so always check and see what the Guide for Authors says. Here's just one example from one journal where they are being particularly strict about what constitutes an author. If you're an author and you're taking credit on a paper, then you have to have made some kind of contribution to it, either to its conception, design, you put work into the acquisition of the data, the analysis or the interpretation. Maybe you were involved in drafting and revising the article. This journal counts all of these as being important when you are claiming authorship. So it's important to make sure that you make the distinction between who is an actual author and who you want to acknowledge. So in terms of the main authors, you have your first author, the general principles that you would follow. The first author is the person who is conducting and supervising the data generation. This person is putting the paper together and submits the paper to the journal. More often than not, they're not one and the same as the corresponding author. The corresponding author is generally someone of a more senior position. If the first author is at the PhD level or associate level, the chances are that they could be moving pretty soon. And so it's important that during that submission process, we're able to keep in contact with someone who has a more stable position. So your corresponding author, although it could be the first author, is usually someone who's from that institution, but usually more senior. Try and avoid acknowledging people who had no input in the paper. It's nice of you, and I'm sure they would appreciate it, but it's not done. It's one of these things that, you know, it will be looked upon disfavorably, and it's better not to do that. And the other thing not to do, you might lose friends and acquaintances by doing so, is forgetting to acknowledge people who did contribute, the ghost authors, who you haven't acknowledged. Acknowledged individuals are people who have helped you with the research, but don't qualify as authors. You want to make sure that you acknowledge their input, generally at the end of the paper and not at the front. These might be advisors, financial supporters, proofreaders, typists, your mother, somebody who helped you stay up late at night making you coffee. In terms of title, very, very important. You need to get your message across as succinctly as possible, as concise as possible, not using too many words. People have to grasp from your title exactly what your paper's about. The first places they're looking to decide whether they're going to read further: your title, your abstract. If you get those wrong, the chances are people aren't going to read further. You're going to lose that citation, potential citation. So effective titles identify the main issue of the paper. They begin with the subject of the paper. They're accurate, unambiguous, they're specific, they're complete, they're short. They don't use rarely used abbreviations. And they need to attract readers. You need to think about today's search engine technology. In some of the Guide for Authors that we have, we instruct people on the type of terms to use that will gain the best results from search engines. Search engine optimization is what we refer to. So as long as you're using the right keywords in the right kind of order, in the right kind of sequence, you're improving your chances of someone finding your work. It's not a given that the search engine is going to find you and rank you highest in the results. If you want to get higher up on those results, if you want to make page 1 in the top 5 or the top 10, you need to think about your title very carefully. With the abstract, you really need to tell readers what you did and the important findings. You really shouldn't be extending beyond 300 words. It's an abstract. You really need to be concise. You're summarizing. Sometimes the journal will ask for you to highlight, to provide highlights of the paper next to the abstract. It's not one or the other. I've had cases recently where editors and authors alike have asked me to remove the highlights from the journal as a requirement. They think that it's superfluous. The abstract should be able to tell the story. There's different meanings about that. I know that it's difficult to provide highlights. You have your keywords, you have your abstract, but if the journal requires them, then you have to provide them. This is your opportunity to showcase your article. Going back to what I was saying, the abstract is available for free for everybody. So it's going to be picked up, and you want, when people pick it up, to be compelled to go into your article and read further. This is your chance to sell yourself. You need to get it right. Like I said, many people don't go past the abstract, including the editors that you're submitting to at the journal. If you don't get the abstract right, you might have a desk reject. You don't even get to the reviewers. A clear abstract will strongly influence if your work is considered further. It's a desk reject, or it's being considered for peer review. You need to get past that stage. So getting that right is really important. Today, the majority of searches are being made within search engines using keywords. This, again, is an area that you need to pay particular attention to. The search engine optimization is important here. It's important not to make them too general. You want to be specific here. You want to increase your chances of someone finding your work. The more general you are, the more hits your search is going to get, someone's search is going to get. Don't make it too narrow. If it's too narrow, you're limiting yourself. Those who are not so well versed in the field are not going to know the exact terminology to use when searching. So you're losing the chance of that interdisciplinary researcher finding your work as well, let alone those in your field who have less experience in searching. So think about the keywords also. And a couple of tips here. When you're putting your article together and trying to think of the keywords to use, look at some of the papers that you're referencing. Look at the keywords that they had in their papers. Look at the kind of sequencing that they're using and the kind of terms that they're using. If it's very similar to what you're presenting, maybe you can take some of those examples or something similar. Play around with them. Do some searches yourself, see what comes back. What kind of results do you get when you use these keywords? So the introduction. With the introduction, you're going from pretty much a general overview of what you're trying to present in your paper down to the specifics of what you found. They should be answering a series of questions. What's the problem? Are there any existing solutions out there? Which one of them is the best? Where are they limited? And what do you hope to achieve with your paper, with your results? What do you present that others have not? Key things to pay attention to. I'm being made aware as I speak of how often I'm saying that. I guess the message throughout this is that you need to pay attention from start to finish. In some cases, a little bit more attention than others, but it's important that when you present your new data, you have to put them into perspective first. Look at what other people have done. Look at the results that they've obtained. Is this groundbreaking stuff? Or is this something maybe that you should wait a little bit longer to publish until you have something that is a little bit more groundbreaking? Try and be brief. You know, nobody likes to listen to a history lesson, let alone 55 slides from some publisher from Amsterdam. Don't mix the introduction, the results, etc. Keep them separate. Know which part of the paper is appropriate for the type of text that you're presenting. And be really careful about using words such as novel, exciting, first ever. Are you really sure that it's so new and the first time ever? Are you really sure that people are going to be excited when they read this? And only cite the relevant references. These lists are there to be used by others who are looking to think more about the work that you've presented, see where you've came from, know that you've produced your own work, that you're giving credit where credit is due. But be careful about how many references you put there, and redundant references. And moreover, there should never, ever be a reference to some random website, blog, etc., YouTube, Wikipedia, the here today, the gone tomorrow. That basically, if you have those kind of references in your list, that's you. That's you presenting yourself to that editor. Are you reliable or are you not? So the results, what have you found? What should be in the results section? Your main findings. So you don't need to present everything. You've been working on this stuff for years. You don't want to have, from start to finish, all your findings. You just want to present the main findings. Be concise. Highlight findings that differ from those in other publications, either from yourself or from your peers. And also the unexpected findings. What weren't you expecting? What took you by surprise and why? And produce the results of your statistical analysis here. It's a very important section. This is the basis of what you're building your paper on. So it's important that those results are clear, unambiguous, and that they can be referred to and explained and backed up. It's also important to use figures and illustrations, tables in your results. Again, thinking about the space that you have and the time that you have. With an image, you can say so much more. It gives you the opportunity to cram some more information in when you don't have the space. And it makes it more interesting to read. When you think about how you're consuming information in that online environment, if you've got 40 pages of flat text, how boring is that? I mean, it could be boring stuff that this person's writing about, but it's even more boring to have to sit through 40 pages of flat text without having the figures, the graphics to refer to. And also add context to what you're reading. So yes, appearance does count. Editors and reviewers will be looking to see that you have thought about the figures that you're including. It's important to pay attention to the information that's contained in those figures? Is it clear? Are you overcrowding them? Can the editor pick out specific pieces of information without having to come back to you, which would be a frustration and an irritation? Make sure that when you are translating, if you're translating your paper, that you don't forget about your figures. Quite often we see that in the legends of the figures, we still have the original language text there. That's irritating as well. If you're submitting to an international journal, 99% is English. So the French, the German abstracts, Turkish abstracts, no need to submit them. English would be the language that you're corresponding in, that you're presenting in, and so it's important to make that consistent. With your figures, only use color where necessary. Although we are publishing 99% of our journals online and are able to use the online environment to produce color images or make them available, it's still important to think about whether it's necessary. If you can convey the same message by using a different type of line, there's no reason for you to use different colors. Likewise, many of the journals that you'll be submitting to are also still publishing in print. There is still a demand, and there is still costs involved in the four-color printing of color figures. So you will be asked if you submit a color figure, if it is relevant, then it has to be published in color, but you will be asked whether the print version should be in color, and if so, that you can bear the cost of making that in print available. So it's good to remember that. Oh yeah, and don't include long, boring tables. So the discussion. I was saying before that the abstract is a place to sell your paper. Well, let's just say we got past the abstract. Now it's the discussion. The discussion is very important. This is when you get to sell the data that you're presenting in your results section. Many of the papers that we do see getting past the initial desk rejection stage often fail because the discussion isn't structured or doesn't hit the right note with the editor and the reviewer. So you need to check these for the following. How do your results relate to the original question and the objectives outlined in the introduction? You need to cross-check back and forth. It's important that your whole paper is a cohesive one article. Are you providing interpretation for each of your results? Are they consistent? Are there differences? If there are differences, then you need to explain why. Are there limitations? And will the discussion now logically lead on to your conclusion? Have you covered everything? Everything that's presented so far in the results? Has it been covered here? Are you able to conclude? And conclude with some conviction that this editor is really going to believe that you are presenting something new, something novel, something that they want to have in their journal, and something that they'll be proud to have in their journal. So don't make statements that go beyond what the results have shown and can support. And don't suddenly, at this point, start introducing new ideas and new terms. Keep to what you've already produced in the paper. So lastly, the conclusions. They can be both global, general, and specific. You can look to the future and make predictions, indicate further use. You can perhaps make suggestions about where further research can go, where it can lead, where somebody else can pick up, where you're going to pick up. If you have something that's already being worked on, this is your chance to already claim it, take credit for it, and get that editor thinking, I really want to hear what the results were of the work that he's doing now. This is great what he's done so far, but I'm also compelled to know what's coming next. Again, it's your passport to the community. You're starting to build your reputation. So don't summarize the paper here. That's what your abstract is for in your introduction. And don't judge. Just keep it unbiased about the impact of this work that you've done. You can think that in your head. Your mother and your father and your grandmother can think that it's fantastic and you're going to be the next Nobel laureate, change the world. You can tell them that. You can convince them that. But with these editors, it's not so easy to convince them. So don't judge. Yeah, be careful about using non-quantitative words. You need to back it up. If you're going to say that it's going to have an enormous impact, what's enormous? On what scale? It's important here to not over-dramatize the work that you've done. I bet you're proud. You've been working on something for years. This is your chance. You're showcasing yourself. But quietly pat yourself on the shoulder. Don't be too outward with that. And yeah, the references, back to those. You need to get them right. You really do. What we do have quite recently is a feature which is called Your Paper, Your Way at Elsevier. Many of the journals have incorporated this, where we allow the authors to submit in any reference style they please. It means that they save time reformatting. We do that reformatting for you. We have the technology available to do that in place. Although there are still journals around who are very adamant that they want to stick to a certain reference style. So it's always important to check what the Guide for Authors says. If the reference style is given, please stick to it, because nobody is going to do that work for you. If it's not one of the journals that has Your Paper, Your Way from Elsevier, I don't know what the other publishers have, probably not as great as we have, but if it's specified what type of reference style, Vancouver, Harvard, stick to it, because it will get sent right back to you if it isn't. Check the spelling of the author's names. You're giving credit here. Remember that all these citation databases, they're pulling this information. Every reference that you make, every citation you give, has to be accredited back to the original author. If you're misspelling names, chances are that that credit isn't going to be given, or it's going to go back and forth a few times. Or someone's going to ask, hey, wait a minute, who's he? I know that paper. Maybe it's even the editor themselves, and God forbid that you would spell their name wrong in the reference list. Avoid citing personal communications, unpublished observations, and manuscripts that are not yet accepted for publication. You can cite what is published in the preprint archives, in the repositories, but it's important that when you get published, that you go back to those repositories and you update your reference. Because what we want to do is make sure that anybody who's accessing that paper via the repositories, the archives, is led eventually to the final published version, the one that went through peer review and has been validified. Some editors may ask you for documents just as a backup to, you don't necessarily have to cite them. They may come back later and ask you to provide them. and you should have that kind of information available if you have mentioned it in your letter or somewhere in your paper. And articles published only in local languages. Yeah, if you're publishing in an international journal, the chances are that when you're citing maybe half of your references to a local, and I know there's some local journal editors here who won't be too happy to hear this, but if you're looking for an international audience and you're looking to give credit to that same international audience, it's important to think about how many local language references you have in your publication. Because ultimately, whoever's interested in reading your work is also interested in reading who you based your work on, or who was inspiring for you. Supplementary material. In the online world, we're seeing more and more of this, in certain fields more than others. Data, for example, in economics is a big thing. The replication of those data, making that data available, having it next to the article so that if someone reading your article wants to access the data, wants to replicate, that it's right there next to the article that they're reading. Likewise, for some authors, the use of video or audio to enhance the messaging in the paper is used. It's important to look at the other papers that are being published and look at the type of supplementary data. If it's highly encouraged in a journal, then it's good for you to start thinking about that. And one thing to keep in mind is that once you're finished writing your paper, and I'm sure this will resonate with many of you, once you're finished writing your paper, it's like, it's published, it's there, forget about it, move on. To go back after the fact and start adding in video, audio, it's harder once that process has reached publication. It's good to be thinking about it as you go through the peer review process. So if you think that people are going to understand your work better, are going to find you more interesting if you provide an audio or a video, or perhaps you're required to supply the data, you need to be thinking about that already right at the start of the submission process. And it has to be related. I mean, that goes without saying, right? You shouldn't be putting up a YouTube video of yourself at your birthday party, I don't know, balancing a cake on your head and fantastic, look how great I am. It has to have something to do with the paper that you're actually presenting. Again, you need to keep in mind here that it's going to vary by subject area, by journal, but these are kind of rough guidelines, averages, that you can go by in terms of the length of the different sections of the paper. The letters, the short communications, rapid communications journals, of course, are much shorter, and there will be different guidelines given there, different limitations. So it's important to make the difference. I have the only letters journal in my portfolio, economics, receiving, for economics, a lot of submissions per year, around about 1,800. And the editors often complain that the submissions that they receive go way beyond the word count limitation or the page limitation. And again, that's your passport to be kicked out at the front door, basically. You won't get past if you haven't taken note of the lengths of the journal. With abbreviations, it's important to cite them as early on as possible. And you don't need to, anything that's common knowledge doesn't need to be abbreviated and then spelled out in full. But keep in mind that what's common knowledge to your field might not necessarily be common knowledge to one of the neighbouring fields. And you're trying to reach an international, interdisciplinary audience in many occasions, so the abbreviations should help the reader understand what you're writing. So if it's not something as common as DNA, then be careful and make sure that you spell it out, avoiding acronyms whenever possible. So you've gone through writing your paper. You're at the point of submission. You have chosen your journal, and you're going to address the editor. You need to think about this in terms of how you would approach a job interview. And that might seem like it's so way more important that you get that letter right than when you're submitting a paper, but this is kind of like an interview process. What you're saying in this interview, in this cover letter, is who you are. Wait a minute. Who you are and why you're submitting the manuscript. It's not going up. Oh, it's there. Okay. So you need to mention here, if you have co-authors, that you have their full approval. You haven't gone off on your own and decided by yourself that it's time to submit. And you've made the decision on your own, and nobody knows about it. You have to state here that all of your co-authors are in agreement and that you're representing them. You need to explain the importance of the research, why the editor should consider it for publication, what's new, what's exciting, what's different. And again, this might differ from journal to journal, field to field, but more often than not, you are requested to submit potential reviewer names. It's not a given that you're going to, that the reviewer names that you give are going to be used, but it's important that you give an indication of knowing who the players are in that field. And maybe don't aim too high, but have a good idea about who the other authors are, who your peers are, and you're helping the editor. You're helping them. If they're not going to use these specific people, they know in any case who to search around. Anything that speeds up that process for the editor is helpful and is going to be appreciated. Some editors are dealing with multiple submissions on a daily basis. And so anything that can speed up that process is welcomed. It is easy for you to find reviewer information. You can use some of these resources that your library has. Scopus would be able to put you in the right direction, searching based on your subject area. Perhaps even just you have someone in mind and you can see who their co-authors are, and you can build up a better idea of who to use in your suggested list. Don't remain too local. If this is an international journal, it's important that you're attracting international reviewers. We want this to be as objective as possible. That's the peer review process, right? That's the way it's supposed to work. And be prepared to suggest between 3 and 6, again based on the guide for authors. You're not going to get it right every single time. I think there's only a very few people who do. And I think it's just important to think about the reasons that you may be rejected before even getting into the peer review stage. These are low-hanging fruit things that you can pick up very easily from a guide for authors. There's no reason, if there's a word count, that you should go 2 pages beyond that. There's no reason, if you've been asked to suggest reviewers, that you would submit a cover letter without actually suggesting the reviewers. There's no reason why you should submit to a journal without having read the aims and scope. Because all of this is just harming your reputation. The next time you come back to that editor, they'll remember you. Most of the time, it amazes me, but they remember people. People who make mistakes are remembered. Usually more often the ones that get cited the most. So take some time. You've prepared your paper. Walk away. Don't be too hasty to submit it. Sleep over it. Leave it for a few days. Go back to it. Have another look. Ask your peers. Ask your supervisor, people that you respect, their opinion. Ask them to look at it and take their comments and their suggestions in the way that they're usually intended, which is to help you improve your chances of getting into that journal and getting published. Not only your supervisor wants you to get published, the university wants you to get published, the country wants you to get published. The statistics that are produced at the department level, the institute level, the country level matter. They really do. So the work that you're putting into your article is not only affecting your career, but also those around you. And attracting new people to this institution based on its performance also can be traced back to each and every single individual and the work that they're putting out there. Universities, institutions are ranked based on their output. And students will decide where to go based on the highest ranking and then work down. So you're not only showcasing yourself, you're showcasing your institution and your country. So it's important to think about all these things before you start thinking about submitting your paper and perhaps getting rejected. We're kind of looping back here, just to give you an idea of how the peer review process works. So you submit a paper to a journal. The first assessment being made is by perhaps the editor-in-chief, the managing editor, the subject editor to whom that paper went to based on subject area. And they're deciding whether they think this paper is worthwhile sending on to the reviewers and having them spend time on it. So you need to get past the basic requirement. If you don't, reject. Back to square one. And you don't want to go back to square one because you're finished with it, right? You finished with it last week. You were out partying at the weekend because you finished your paper. You're not there yet. You need to get past the basic requirements. Once you're past that, the editor will assign reviewers. Generally, what we try to get the editors to work to, the time to first decision for us as a publisher is very important. We pay very close attention to that. This is one of the areas that we also assess performance of the editors, and yes, we do assess performance of the editors. We're very grateful for the editors, but we also want them to do a good job because ultimately we're working for you, we're working for the author and the scientific community at large. The time to first decision we want to happen as quickly as possible. We don't want authors to be kept sitting around, waiting, biting their nails, wanting to know what the decision is. If they're not going to get into that journal, we want to give them the opportunity to get onto the next journal as soon as possible. So we don't want them sitting on it for months or even weeks. Within economics, within my portfolio, we try to get that decision made within 1 week to 10 days. We know that there are many demands on their time. We think that's a reasonable request. If you get past the basic requirements, the next time that we're looking at is the time it takes for the reviewer to return the reports and for the editor to make a decision. That can take quite some time, and again, it depends on the field. It depends on the type of journal that you're submitting to. If it's a letters journal or a communications journal, that process is going to go faster. What we do have, and I'll show you that later on, is on the journal websites. Each of the journal websites has data available at that journal level on the average time for reviewing. You can check that. You can even ask that if you're specifically interested in the time to the first decision. You can ask the publisher, and they would provide that information to you. We have that readily available. So it can differ from field to field, from journal to journal, from manuscript type to manuscript type. Once the reviews are collected, if the decision, and the majority of them are, to revise, then you're going to receive comments from the reviewers, and you'll be expected to turn those round with a new revised manuscript, again within a certain time. If you don't, then the chances are that the editor might say, "We've been waiting far too long for you. Go submit somewhere else." And the reason that they're doing that, again, it has to do with the statistics at that kind of journal level and their own performance. They want to see that the time spent handling a manuscript is as short as it can be within the time constraints that they have. And if you decide to go off and travel the world for 2 years and leave your manuscript to revise when you get back, chances are when you get back, there's no place for you in that journal anymore. So it's important to take those comments and to turn your revision around fast. If you're one of the very who get accepted outright, then congratulations. After that, it's pretty fast. You get accepted. You have an article in press. It's already citable with the DOI. And shortly after that, you will find that your article appears in an issue or in a volume with your full reference. And don't forget to go back, if you have posted something in the repositories, the archives, to go back and update that reference. So I've gone over this already, the accepted and rejected. The desk reject stage is important because editors do not want to take advantage of the valuable resource that they see in their refereeing base, the reviewers. There are many papers that are submitted that don't meet the criteria, and we don't want to waste people's time. Reviewers are being called upon not just by one journal but by many journals, and so we don't want to push papers on that don't meet criteria. The reviewers aren't there to correct your mistakes, not all of them in any case. They're there for advice and helping you improve your paper, not to cut short your abstract or improve your reference list. How many more have I got? So the minor and major revisions, both of which are potential acceptances, but it's important to take into consideration all of the comments that are being given by the referees and to address each one of them. If you've been allowed a major revision, this is because actually it's not really suitable for publication, but the editor has seen something in your paper that has excited him. and there's other stuff there that he's willing to spend more time on with you and get you through that process than he would have normally. So you're looking, if you've been asked to do a major revision, don't be annoyed, don't go in a sulk. The chances are you've got a really good paper there and someone is willing to invest the time in you. Invest the time in your own paper, invest the time in yourself. It's a great learning opportunity. You're going to take those comments, you're going to address each and every single one of them. And if you don't agree, you need to substantiate why you don't agree. And it could be that the editor comes back and agrees with you, but you need to take every single one of those comments into consideration and make sure that it's visible that you have. Because again, if you don't, reject. When you're writing, when you're submitting your revision, include a cover letter again. Be polite, be nice, thankful that you're getting all this valuable information for nothing. And tell the reviewers, because they could be looking at this, the editor might pass this on, that you've looked at their comments and you've taken it seriously. It's important that you address them. And remember, you've spent so much time on this. This is where you can really mess it up. If you go back at this stage, after getting through so many of these other obstacles, don't mess it up. Pay attention.